قال المؤلف رحمه الله, said the author, that's Imam Ibn Hajar Al-Asqalaniyy, may Allah have mercy upon him. وزيادة راويهما أي الصحيح والحسن مقبولة ما لم تقع منافية لرواية من هو أوثق ممن لم يذكر تلك الزيادة. The addition of their narrator. Who's they? We mean the narrator of the Sahih Hadith and the Hasan Hadith. The addition of the narrator of a Sahih or Hasan Hadith. Meaning, we're talking about now comparing narrations. One narration has in it something that another does not. What's the judgment of this extra statement in one narration that doesn't exist in the other narration? The addition of their narrator, the narrator of the authentic hadith and the fair hadith, is maqbulatun, acceptable. Ma lam taqa' munafiyatan, as long as it doesn't fall contrary li riwayati man huwa awthaqu, contrary to the narration of someone more reliable. As long as it doesn't fall in opposition to the narration of someone more reliable. أوثق ممن لم يذكر تلك الزيادة. More reliable, as long as it doesn't fall in contradiction to the narration of someone who's more reliable than who did not mention that addition. Contrary. There's a difference between contrary and different. Two things can be different without being against each other. لأن الزيادة إما أن تكون لا تنافي بينها وبين رواية من لم يذكرها, because the extra that's in one narration, its case is that it's either not going to be contrary to, does not contradict another narration, the narration of someone who didn't narrate, who didn't mention this addition. فَهَذِهِ تُقْبَلُ مُطْلَقًا, and this one is absolutely acceptable. Yani, two narrations, one of them has an extra statement, and this extra statement is in no way contradictory to the narration of the one who didn't mention it. This is acceptable. We're talking about acceptable hadiths on both sides too. We're not talking about one of them is weak, like he said up here, the Sahih and the Hasan in particular. We're not talking about weak hadiths here. لأنها في حكم الحديث المستقل, because this version that has an extra statement in it, it's like an independent hadith. It has the status of an independent hadith. الذي ينفرد به الثقة, an independent hadith that a trustworthy person narrated uniquely. It's like that. Don't we accept an independent hadith uniquely narrated by a trustworthy narrator? Yes, we do. So, a version of a hadith that has an extra statement in it, as long as it's not contradictory to the other version, it's like that. وَلَا يَرْوِيهِ عَنْ شَيْخِهِ غَيْرُهُ. It's like someone who narrates something in a way that no one else narrated it from his shaykh. That's acceptable, as long as there's no contradiction there. وَإِمَّا أَن تَكُونَ مُنَافِيَةً, or it's other cases that it would be contradictory, بحيث يلزم من قبولها رد الرواية الأخرى, in such a way that if we were to accept this addition, we would have to reject the other narration. So it's either this one or that one. فهذه التي يقع الترجيح بينها وبين معارضها. This is the one that needs preponderance between it and the one that's against it. So like we said before, we're not hadith masters, and we cannot judge these hadiths. We can't rank these hadiths. But there's still benefits for us. in this hadith science, because these principles, we can still apply them. We can still incorporate them into our way of going about things. So we're talking about here having two reports. One of them has something extra in it. So should we reject the one with something extra because it's not in the other one? No. But what if there is no way to put those two together? Then you need to preponderate between them. Why? Because they both came from reliable source. So here's another lesson. We're not going to reject information that comes through reliable source. Sometimes when a person does not want to know something, he will shut himself off from it. And he doesn't regard that that's coming from a reliable source, so that he should consider it. فهذه التي يقع الترجيح بينها وبين معارضها. This is the narration, this is the case where we have to preponderate between these two narrations. فيقبل الراجح ويرد المرجوح. So the heftier one will be accepted and the lighter one will be rejected. واشتهر عن جمع من العلماء القول بقبول الزيادة مطلقا من غير تفصيل. And it is famous about some scholars, about a group of scholars, that they said that the additional statement is acceptable without detail, period. So he says it's famous about a group of scholars that they said that the additional statement in one version over the other is acceptable without a detail. ولا يتأتى ذلك على طريق المحدثين الذين يشترطون في الصحيح ألا يكون شاذا. But this absoluteness is unachievable. It's not acceptable according to the way of the hadith scholars, who make it a condition for a hadith to be authentic that it's not irregular. What does irregular mean? Irregular means that we can't find exactly what's the defect in there, but we know it's defective because it goes against something stronger. So not being irregular is one of the conditions of authenticity. What are the conditions of authenticity? They are trustworthiness, connectivity of the chain, accuracy, not having an effective defect, and not being irregular. So these last two are closely related. Not having an effective defect and not being irregular. Someone might say, what's the difference? Isn't being irregular a defect? Yes, being irregular is a defect. Then someone might say, don't the scholars categorize in a way that is better than that? Like when one thing comes under the other thing, don't they make it underneath and they don't give it its own category? Yeah, that's true. So I'm confused. Why is being irregular a separate condition from not being defective? Why is not being irregular a separate condition from not being defective? The answer is because, yes, irregularity is a defect. The reason why the scholars gave it its own category as a condition for authenticity is because it's a type of defect that we can't discover it. We didn't discover it. Exactly where the defect is not pinpointed. Meaning, as far as the chain is concerned, it checks out. It's fine. As far as the text is concerned, without comparing it to other things, but simply going by the known rules of the religion, the fundamentals of the religion, there's nothing wrong there. So we didn't find really something wrong with it by itself. It wasn't until we compared it to another hadith, and then we found that we couldn't put them together. And then we had to weigh them against each other to determine which one is stronger. And then we took the stronger one and left out the weaker one. So because its defect is undiscovered, really, then it has its own category. So Ibn Hajar says it's famous about a group of scholars that they said that the addition in one version over another is accepted absolutely without detail. And this is not possible. This is not achievable. Yani, you can't do that. You can't go there, not according to the way of the hadith scholars who said that, meaning, yani, you can't be without detail here. That's what's not achievable. To accept the addition without a detail, that part without a detail, that's unachievable, according to the way of the hadith scholars, who said that the condition for an authentic hadith is that it's clear of irregularity, of being anomalous. ثم يفسرون الشذوذ بمخالفة الثقة من هو أوثق منه. And they define irregularity as a trustworthy reporter opposing someone who's more trustworthy than he is. So if this is the condition for authenticity, then we can't say that the addition is accepted without detail. That absoluteness there goes against. It stands contrary to the condition of not having irregularity in the hadith. وَالْعَجَبُ مِمَّنْ أَغْفَلَ ذَلِكَ مِنْهُمْ مع اعترافه باشتراط انتفاء الشذوذ في حد الحديث الصحيح. And it's strange that they were absent-minded about this, while at the same time confessing that it is a condition for an authentic hadith to be clear of anomaly. وَكَذَا الْحَسَنِ, and also the Hasan hadith has to be clear of anomaly. They said yes. If you ask them, does the Sahih hadith have to be clear of anomaly? They said yes. Does the Hasan hadith have to be clear of anomaly? They said yes. So how could they also say the additional statement is accepted absolutely without detail? Those two can't go together. So that's strange. So that's a case of being, talking so precisely. This is a case of talking so precisely that everything that needs to be included in what you're saying is included, and everything that should be excluded from what you're saying is excluded. Perhaps we talked about that before. If not in this lesson, in other lessons. The scholars, when they define things and when they give parameters and rules, the precise scholars, the meticulous scholars, not all of them, the meticulous ones, they want their definitions and parameters and rules to be what's called jami' mani'. Jami' means all-inclusive, gathering everything that should be gathered. Mani' means preventive, prevents from accepting into the definition or the rule what should be excluded, what should not be included. If you wanted to define a house in this way, then you need to mention in your definition the walls and the ceiling, for example. you wouldn't be defining that exactly enough if you leave out the wall or the ceiling in the definition, or if you add to the definition, let's say, the yard. You wanted to define the house and you added the yard in your definition. So that doesn't have to be there. So that should be excluded. But let's say the walls and the ceiling have to be there. So if you didn't mention the walls and the ceiling, then that's missing. It needs to be included. So this is how the scholars define things and how they talk about rules. It's a way of process of elimination and inclusion and elimination. The author says, وَالْمَنْقُولُ عَنْ أَئِمَّةِ الْحَدِيثِ الْمُتَقَدِّمِينَ. What is logged about the forerunning Imams of Hadith, the early ones, كعبد الرحمن ibn Mahdi, like Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, ويحيى القطان, and Yahya al-Qattan, وأحمد ibn Hanbal, and Ahmad ibn Hanbal, ويحيى ibn Ma'in, وعلي ibn al-Madani, ibn al-Madini, وعلي ibn al-Madini, والبخاري وأبي زرعة وأبي حاتم والنسائي والدارقطني وغيرهم, and others. So I just said all those names. And instead of saying and, I just said what in Arabic. And. What's logged about them is اعتبار الترجيح فيما يتعلق بالزيادة وغيرها. What's logged about them is giving regard to preponderance concerning what's related to additional statements and other things. ولا يعرف عن أحد منهم إطلاق قبول الزيادة. And it's not known about any one of those early forerunning Imams that they were absolute about accepting an additional statement. وأعجب من ذلك إطلاق كثير من الشافعية. And what's even stranger is that many Shafi'is said القول بقبول زيادة الثقة مع أن نص الشافعي يدل على غير ذلك. What's even stranger is that many Shafi'i scholars were absolute about accepting the additional statement of a trustworthy reporter. They said it's accepted, and they were absolute about it. They didn't restrict it. And those were Shafi'i scholars. مع أن نص الشافعي يدل على غير ذلك. Although the documentation of Ash-Shafi'i himself proves otherwise, according to Ash-Shafi'i. Meaning, how are they Shafi'is and they're going against the Imam? Can't go against the Imam when you're following the way of the Imam. It's an important point here. Slight digression really quick here. Isn't it true that the scholars disagree with each other sometimes? Yes, that's true. Isn't it true that even within one madhab, there's different sayings? Yes, that's true. So Shafi'i school could differ from Hanafi school or Maliki school. And within the Shafi'i school, there could be different sayings amongst the scholars within the school. Okay. But what you need to know, very important, is that you can't disagree with the Imam, though. So if you're a Shafi'i scholar, you can't disagree with a Shafi'i because he's the Imam. We're not saying you have to believe everything he says. No, we're talking about as far as being a Shafi'i. If you're not a Shafi'i himself and you're following a Shafi'i, then you can't disagree with him because you're a follower. You're allowed to follow another madhab if you want. You can follow Abu Hanifa school if you want. But if you're a Hanafi, you can't disagree with Abu Hanifa. If you're a Maliki, you can't disagree with Malik. You could disagree with the scholars under them inside the madhab if you have the rank to disagree with them, but you can't disagree with the Imam. So keep that in mind, because sometimes some people will try to pass a falsehood on you. You'd say, well, a Shafi'i didn't say that. And they'd say, yeah, but An-Nawawi said it. You say, well, An-Nawawi was a Shafi'i. You can't put An-Nawawi against a Shafi'i. An-Nawawi's not even allowed to disagree with a Shafi'i as far as being a Shafi'i scholar. So Ibn Hajar says, what's even stranger is that many Shafi'is were absolute about saying that an additional statement from a trustworthy reporter is accepted, although a Shafi'i, what he documented, proves otherwise. فإنه قال في أثناء كلامه على ما يعتبر به حال الراوي. So AICP Lebanon, in which school? Usually AICP is following Shafi'i school, usually. But we have people who follow Hanafi school. And we have people who follow Maliki school. We have people who learn those schools very well. And they would be, if somebody wants to learn those madhabs in AICP, they would go to those ones. But mostly it's Shafi'i school. So what did Ash-Shafi'i say? فَإِنَّهُ قَالَ فِي أَثْنَاءِ كَلَامِهِ على ما يعتبر به حال الراوي في الضبط. Because he said while discussing what should be considered for the case of a narrator in terms of accuracy, when he was discussing the accuracy of a narrator, ما نصه, he said, quote, ويكون إذا شرك أحدا من الحفاظ لم يخالفه. This precise reporter, his case should be that if he's narrating something that the Hafiz narrate, the big scholars, if he shares with the big scholars, the massive headmasters in some hadith narrations, then to be an accurate one who's reporting what the masters report, he has to not go against them. His reporting has to be not contrary to theirs. لم يخالفه فإن خالفه فوجد حديثه أنقص. So if his report is different from the report of those big masters, by being less, by having less than what they reported. They reported something, and when you see how this one reported, this one who's lower than them, when you see how he reported, his report is less than what they reported. كان في ذلك دليل على صحة مخرج حديثه. Look what Ash-Shafi'i said. That would be an evidence for the authenticity of the hadith he produces. He's saying, if you have a hadith, this hadith is narrated by massive masters of hadith, and someone who's not a massive master, he narrates the hadith too. He shares with them in this narration, but he's not at their level. Then he has to not be different from them. So what if he is different from them? What if he's narrating differently than they are? Then if what he's narrating is less than what they are narrating, Shafi'i says that's a proof that he's accurate. That would be a proof that he's accurate if it's less. وَمَتَى خَالَفَ مَا وَصَفْتُ أَضَرَّ ذَلِكَ بِحَدِيثِهِ. And whenever it's different from what I have described, like if it's different because it has more than what they narrated, then this would harm his hadith. This would harm his hadith. انتهى كلامه. That's the end of his quote. ومقتضاه أنه إذا خالف. So what this means is, at the end, is that if this one, he has something different in his narration, فوجد حديثه أزيد, and his hadith is found to be having more than what the masters narrate. Excuse me. أضر ذلك بحديثه. This would be harmful to his hadith then. So that means a Shafi'i doesn't accept additional statement absolutely. فدل على أن زيادة العدل عنده لا يلزم قبولها مطلقا. So this proves that the addition of a trustworthy reporter is not binding to be accepted absolutely according to Ash-Shafi'i. وإنما تقبل من الحفاظ. Rather, the additional statement is accepted according to Ash-Shafi'i from the top headmasters, not from who's lower than the top headmasters. فإنه اعتبر أن يكون حديث هذا المخالف أنقص من حديث من خالفه من الحفاظ. Ash-Shafi'i regards that this one would be accurate when the difference in his narration is that his narration is less than theirs. It has in it less than theirs. The addition is in theirs, not in his. When you compare the two. وجعل نقصان هذا الراوي من الحديث دليلا على صحته. Ash-Shafi'i deemed for this narrator's difference to be having less, that this is evidence for the authenticity of his report. This is evidence for his accuracy. لأنه يدل على تحريه, because by being less, that proves that he's cautious. That means he's just going to say what he's sure is correct. So he was narrating accurately, and he only said what's right, and he didn't have some of the extra things that the top masters had. For Ash-Shafi'i, this proves that he's an accurate narrator. Ash-Shafi'i is granting having additional statements to the masters, not to less than the masters. وَجَعَلَ مَا عَدَى ذَلِكَ مُضِرًّا بِحَدِيثِهِ. And Ash-Shafi'i made anything else harmful to the hadith. فَدَخَلَتْ فِيهِ زِيَادَةً. So that includes an additional statement. فلو كانت عنده مقبولة مطلقا لم تكن مضرة بصاحبها. So had the additional statement been acceptable to Ash-Shafi'i absolutely, then it would not have been harmful to the narrator who's less than one of those masters.